He is the brain, the heart, the very pulse of Iron Maiden, a bass genius who turned deep, growling lines into the immortal signature of heavy metal. Yet behind that steadfast presence, Steve Harris's life has been laden with private tragedies. A youthful dream cut short, a bitterly broken marriage, fiery clashes with his own bandmates, and the years he admitted were the darkest of his life. Fans only see Steve Harris standing coldly on the left side of the stage, his face like stone, holding the rhythm for tens of thousands screaming fans. Few know that there were nights he returned to an empty house, facing the void of a collapsed family. Few know that at one point, under the strain of conflict with Bruce Dickinson and the wounds of his personal life, he nearly walked away from the very band he had poured his soul into. Talent carried Steve Harris to the summit, but it was pain that carved his name deeper into history. His journey leaves us with an unsettling paradox. How can a man bear the weight of an entire heavy metal legend, while his own private life shattered time and again? Steve Harris was born on March 12, 1956, in Leytonstone, a suburb in East London, Essex. It was a land of cramped little streets, where working-class families crowded into rows of terraced houses, where industrial smoke and the roar of factory machines clouded the skies. Life here ran on habit and discipline, mornings at work, evenings back home, nights spent in front of the TV or at the local pub. Harris grew up in that environment, not deprived enough to fall into despair, but never once touching luxury. That steady, rigid rhythm of a working-class household shaped his character, practical, patient, and more resilient than most of his peers. His childhood revolved around a passion that seemed destined to define his life: football. From the age of 9, he was bound heart and soul to West Ham United, a team whose crest he would later proudly print on his bass guitar as part of his very identity. Harris didn't just want to cheer from the stands. The boy wanted to be part of the team. That dream was not far-fetched. His early talent caught the eyes of West Ham's scouts, and he was officially recruited into the youth training squad. For a kid from East London, it wasn't just an honor. It was a ticket out of the monotonous orbit of factory life, a promise of a future on the pitch rather than in a workshop. At that moment, fate seemed to have written Harris's path as a professional footballer. But in his teenage years, destiny veered unexpectedly. Music slipped into his life quietly but forcefully, and the dream of the pitch slowly faded. The thunderous, haunting sounds of Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Jethro Tull, Genesis, and UFO jolted him awake as if a new world had opened. Among them, Pete Way, the wild, untamed bassist of UFO, became his idol. Harris saw something different in Pete, that the bass, long dismissed as support, could be as sharp and leading a weapon as the electric guitar. At first, Harris dreamed of sitting behind a drum kit, driving rhythms to his heart's content. But the cramped family home in Leytonstone made that impossible. There was no space for such a bulky instrument, and the family's modest means couldn't afford such luxuries. Cornered, Harris settled on the bass, a decision that at first seemed accidental, but later came to define his entire career. In 1971, at just 15, he scraped together enough to buy his first instrument, a cheap copy of a Fender Precision for $40. With no teacher and no instruction books, Harris taught himself by ear, by sight, and through long nights of trial and error in his bedroom. His fingertips soon hardened and bled, but in return, he edged closer each day to a unique sound, furious and galloping, that would one day become the hallmark of Iron Maiden. From there, Harris quickly entered the world of school bands. He first joined a group called Influence, later renamed Gypsy's Kiss. They played a handful of small pub shows, modest gigs, but enough to give Harris a taste of the stage. Yet Gypsy's Kiss soon fell apart, a first failure that did not deter him. Not long after, in 1974, he joined Smiler, It was here that Harris first dared to bring forward his own compositions. Instead of encouragement, he was met with cold rejection. His songs, complex and full of shifting rhythms and structures, were dismissed as too complicated, not suitable to play. Stung by the dismissal from his own bandmates, Harris left Smiler in bitterness. But disappointment turned into fuel. Harris realized that if he wanted to play the music he believed in, he could not rely on others. Rather than compromise, he decided to form a new band, a band that would play Harris's music, aligned with his heartbeat and vision. And from that turning point came the birth of Iron Maiden, the beginning of an entirely new chapter in the history of heavy metal. Christmas 1975, after failed attempts with Gypsy's Kiss and Smiler, Steve Harris no longer wanted to rely on anyone else to play the music he believed in. He decided to build his own musical home. A new band was born and named Iron Maiden, a name that came to Harris after watching the film The Man in the Iron Mask, which made him immediately think of the medieval torture device of the same name. Those two words alone evoked darkness and brutality, yet carried the metallic weight Harris longed to channel through music. He didn't stop at the name. Harris personally sketched the first logo, its sharp, cold lines forming the distinctive Maiden typeface, an image that instantly became part of the band's identity. From the very beginning, Harris showed that Iron Maiden was not just a band, but a symbol, a declaration expressed through both sound and image. On May 1st, 1976, Iron Maiden took the stage at St. Nick's Hall in Poplar for their first official gig. The audience was only a few dozen, mostly regulars there for beer, but for Harris it was a milestone. From then on, the Cart and Horses pub in Stratford became their regular venue, a small drinking hole later remembered as the birthplace of British heavy metal. In that modest starting ground, Harris realized that even a handful of listeners could form the foundation for a future empire. The path, of course, was far from smooth. In the early years, Iron Maiden's lineup shifted constantly. The band went through Paul Mario Day, then Dennis Wilcock, who brought to the stage theatrics inspired heavily by Kiss, with fake blood and dramatic face paint. Yet these were only fleeting experiments. It wasn't until Bruce Dickinson arrived that the band finally found a voice equal to Harris's ambition. Through all the turbulence, Harris remained the decisive center, discarding what didn't fit and keeping the band on the course he had mapped out. With Iron Maiden, Harris was never just the bassist. He wrote most of the songs, handled arrangements, played keyboards, sang backing vocals, and even worked behind the scenes on production. The band's sound, in many ways, was a reflection of his mind, complex, intense, and tightly controlled. Most notably, his galloping bass style, the three-note pattern, 1-8 plus 2x1 to 16, played with 2 fingers, combined with treble-heavy EQ that made the bass ring as sharply as rhythm guitar, became an unmistakable signature. In Harris's hands, the bass, often relegated to the background, became the very heartbeat of the band. After years of grinding it out in pubs, the breakthrough finally came. In 1979, Iron Maiden signed with EMI. From a no-name group in East London, they suddenly had the chance to break free from dingy bars and step into the mainstream current of the British music industry. For Harris, that contract laid the first stone of his dream, to build a heavy metal empire. The EMI deal quickly materialized with Iron Maiden, 1980, their self-titled debut album. Despite being recorded under limited conditions, its music carried a raw, urgent force, almost as if it had erupted straight from East London's basements and pubs. Songs like Running Free and Phantom of the Opera not only captured the wild, untamed energy of a new generation, but also revealed Harris's broad vision in crafting multi-layered, rhythmically complex compositions. To everyone's surprise, the album didn't just stir the underground, it climbed the UK charts, marking a leap no one could have imagined just a few years earlier in those grimy pubs. For Harris, it was undeniable proof that his stubborn, uncompromising path had finally been validated. Just 1 year later came Killers, 1981. If the debut still carried a raw edge, Killers displayed a marked leap in production and technique. It was also the first time fans were introduced to guitarist Adrian Smith, whose refined, melodic style brought balance to Iron Maiden's high-speed ferocity. His thick, assured riffs added the missing dimension Harris had long envisioned, quickly making him indispensable to the band's evolving sound. That same year, a defining change arrived, one that would give Iron Maiden its true face. Paul Di'Anno, the band's first singer, departed after conflicts and a reckless lifestyle, and his spot was filled by Bruce Dickinson. His arrival detonated everything. If Harris was the brain orchestrating the machine, then Bruce became Iron Maiden's soul. With his soaring, theatrical vocals, Dickinson not only reached stratospheric high notes, but also infused each song with a living drama. On stage, he appeared as a warrior, commanding the space with fierce charisma, radiating an energy that convinced audiences they weren't just at a concert. They were part of a ritual. The clearest proof came soon after, with The Number of the Beast, 1982. This album hit like a nuclear blast, exploding across the globe. It shot straight to #1 in the UK, paving the way for Iron Maiden's worldwide conquest. Tracks like Run to the Hills and Hallowed Be Thy Name became timeless classics, not just because of Bruce's steel-shattering voice, but also thanks to the foundation Harris had built. Relentless galloping bass lines, intricate yet cohesive song structures, and lyrics with epic scope. From that point, Iron Maiden was no longer just a rising act of a new movement. They had become a defining landmark of heavy metal itself. But Harris didn't stop there. He and Iron Maiden pressed on with Peace of Mind, 1983, and Power Slave, 1984. Albums that not only confirmed their overflowing creativity, but also revealed the boundless ambition of a band intent on conquering the world. Peace of Mind spun labyrinths of myth and literature, from Flight of Icarus inspired by Greek legend to Tame a Land based on the novel Dune. The music combined intricate structures with thematic weight, showing that Harris wasn't just writing songs, he was building self-contained worlds. Only a year later, Power Slave elevated Iron Maiden to yet another level. From its majestic ancient Egypt-themed cover to monumental tracks like Aces High and 2 Minutes to Midnight, the album stood as proof of Harris's grand, epic vision. Most of all, the 13-minute rhyme of The Ancient Mariner showcased his genius in weaving galloping bass, layered guitars, and lyrics drawn from classic poetry into a colossal musical journey. Each work of this era showed Iron Maiden growing more mature, intricate, and captivating. And at the center of it all remained Steve Harris, not only playing bass, but acting as the conductor of composition, arrangement, and production. The pinnacle of this period was undeniably the World Slavery Tour, 1984-1985. This was not just a tour, it was a cultural phenomenon in heavy metal. With 193 shows across 28 countries in nearly a year and a half, it etched Iron Maiden's name among the most relentless touring acts in history. The stage design was elaborate, dripping with ancient Egyptian grandeur, complete with massive statues and temple-like backdrops, turning each concert into a visual spectacle. The peak came at the Long Beach Arena in California, captured in the legendary live album Live After Death, 1985. With explosive performances of Aces High, The Trooper, and Power Slave, the album became not only a milestone for Iron Maiden, but one of the greatest live records in rock history. It immortalized Iron Maiden at the height of their power, artistically and globally. Through the World Slavery Tour, Iron Maiden's name truly broke free of Britain's borders, cementing their status as a worldwide phenomenon. And though Harris always stood back from the spotlight, leaving the glare to Bruce Dickinson's vocals and the twin guitar attack, in reality, He was the silent architect of the entire metal empire, the one who held the rhythm, built the structures, and envisioned the path that would make Iron Maiden a legend. After the triumphant success of the World Slavery Tour, Iron Maiden returned to the studio with the ambition of expanding their creative scope. In 1986, they released Somewhere in Time, a futuristic album with artwork inspired by science fiction. Yet behind that striking cover lay hidden fractures. Bruce Dickinson, exhausted after the grueling tour, wanted to experiment with a more acoustic, smoother direction, hoping to find a new outlet for creativity. But Steve Harris flatly refused. To Harris, Iron Maiden was metal, it was power, and he would not allow any softening to dilute his vision. This was the first time the creative clash between the band's brain and its soul became unmistakably clear. Still, Harris proved the strength of his vision when Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, 1988, was released. This was Iron Maiden's first and only concept album, exploring themes of mysticism, the supernatural, and destiny. With its tight structure, more complex instrumentation, and songs like Can I Play with Madness and The Evil That Men Do, the album was hailed by critics as Maiden's artistic peak of the 1980s. Harris not only shaped the music but also steered the storytelling, turning the album into a unified, compelling work. The tension, however, was not confined to the studio. Even on stage, clashes between Harris and Dickinson grew increasingly visible. They argued over where to stand, where to place monitors, even where to set the mic stand. On one occasion, a mic stand smashed straight into Bruce's face, chipping or breaking a tooth, a testament to the heated atmosphere behind the seemingly flawless performances. For Harris, the stage was a battlefield, and compromise had no place there. As the 1990s began, Iron Maiden shifted direction again. No Prayer for the Dying, 1990, carried a rawer, more stripped-down sound, closer to traditional rock. But this simplicity left many fans disappointed, feeling the band had lost the complexity that once defined them. 2 years later, Fear of the Dark, 1992, reignited the debate. Although the title track became an instant hit and remains one of their most anticipated live staples, the album as a whole received mixed reviews. Some fans believed Harris was trying to refresh the band by going back to basics, while others saw it as a sign of creative stagnation. After years of tension both in the studio and on stage, 1993 brought a double tragedy for Steve Harris. Bruce Dickinson announced he was leaving to pursue a solo career, and just months later, Harris divorced Lorraine, his wife of over a decade. Losing both Iron Maiden's voice and his own family, Harris fell into the darkest period of his life. He admitted he was so angry he wanted to punch Bruce, even accusing Dickinson of not giving his best in the final shows, particularly Raising Hell. For Harris, the betrayal was not just professional. It was a deep fracture in the brotherhood he had worked so hard to build from the very beginning. To keep going, Iron Maiden brought in Blaze Bayley, former singer of Wolfsbane. But this change was a risky gamble. Bayley's voice was deep and heavy, but lacked the dramatic high range that had become Dickinson's trademark. The two albums released during this period reflected the instability. The X Factor, 1995, carried a dark, brooding tone, almost mirroring Harris's own depression and loss after his divorce. Its music was bleak, complexly arranged, but missing the explosive energy fans expected, leaving many feeling alienated. In 1998, Virtual Apple followed, but the situation hardly improved. Despite promising tracks like Futural and The Klansman, the album fell short commercially. Fans were divided. Some tried to support Bayley, but the majority felt Iron Maiden had lost their identity. This was the hardest chapter of Harris's career. Falling sales, a shaken image, and his own admission that he had considered giving it all up. Yet, just as he had once overcome the heartbreak of losing his boyhood dream of football, Harris refused to quit. He kept Iron Maiden alive, despite the fans turning away and the criticism pouring in. The stubbornness that once had him labeled dictatorial became the very thing that saved the band. After those shaky years, 1999 marked the greatest turning point in Iron Maiden's history and in Steve Harris's life. After tense but nostalgic conversations, Harris swallowed his pride and invited Bruce Dickinson and Adrian Smith back. The reunion was more than a lineup change. It was like a family coming back together after years of estrangement. With the three essential pieces reunited, Iron Maiden immediately rekindled their flame. The result was Brave New World, 2000, recorded in Paris with producer Kevin Shirley. This wasn't just another studio album, it was Iron Maiden's declaration of rebirth. Tracks like The Wicker Man and Blood Brothers carried both grandeur and mature emotion. The album quickly won over critics and fans alike, restoring Maiden to the throne many thought they had lost forever. That triumph was immortalized at Rock in Rio 2001, where Iron Maiden performed before over 250,000 fans. It was more than a concert. It was a baptism for a new generation of metal, with Harris's music thundering from the shadows, shaking the world. Harris continued to guide the band to new heights with Dance of Death, 2003, and A Matter of Life and Death, 2006. These albums proved Iron Maiden refused to live off past glory. They dared to experiment with complex structures, philosophical lyrics, and ambitious soundscapes. Once again, Harris showed himself as the architect at the core, pushing Maiden ever forward. Their boldest move came in 2008-2009 with the Somewhere Back in Time World Tour. Iron Maiden chartered a Boeing 757, christened Ed Force One, piloted by Bruce Dickinson himself, now also a commercial pilot. The global tour was a logistical feat unprecedented in rock history. The journey was captured in the documentary Flight 666, which became an instant classic, not just for the music, but for showcasing the unity, willpower, and resilience of men who had weathered countless storms yet still lived for metal. After Flight 666, Iron Maiden entered the new decade with undiminished ambition. In 2010, they released The Final Frontier, a sci-fi-inspired album with futuristic artwork and their most expansive sound yet. While some critics argued they had strayed too far from traditional Maiden, the album still hit #1 in 28 countries, proving Harris and company could conquer the world on their own terms. In 2015, they returned with The Book of Souls, their first double album, proof their creativity was far from spent. Its centerpiece was the epic 18-minute Empire of the Clouds, composed and played on piano by Dickinson. Recounting the 1930 R-101 airship disaster, it was both tragic and cinematic, hailed as one of Maiden's artistic pinnacles. Harris's dense bass lines and tight structures kept the massive project intact, anchoring the grandeur with discipline. They didn't stop. In 2021, Iron Maiden released Senjutsu, inspired by Japanese culture, with Eddie clad in samurai armor on the cover. The music was still heavy, layered, and ambitious, showing Harris and Maiden still refused the safe path, still hungry to explore their future past. Tour in 2023 blended new material from Senjutsu with classics from Somewhere in Time, turning every show into a fusion of nostalgia and future vision. Alongside Iron Maiden, Steve Harris nurtured his second child called British Lion. Originally conceived in the early 1990s, Harris officially released British Lion in 2012. Unlike Maiden, British Lion leaned toward classic hard rock, more melodic than epic. Harris toured extensively with the band in small clubs across Europe, South America, Japan, and Canada, a way to stay close to fans and keep his feet on the ground after Maiden's global flights. In 2020, they released their second album, The Burning, proving British Lion was not just a side project, but a serious part of his creative journey. By 2025, Iron Maiden still stands tall as an indestructible fortress of heavy metal. With over 130 million albums sold and more than 2,500 shows worldwide, Steve Harris, the boy who once dreamed of being a footballer in Leytonstone, has become the architect of a rare legacy, one built on resilience, discipline, and unshakable faith, creating one of the most glorious chapters in rock history. As Iron Maiden began to carve out a name in London in the late 1970s, Steve Harris's life also took a pivotal private turn. He met Lorraine Jury, a woman outside the world of stage lights who became the first safe harbor in his life. There aren't many details about how they met. It's only known that love arrived when Harris was still a struggling musician, with no spotlight and no million-dollar contracts. With patience and simplicity, Lorraine stood by him through the most precarious years, when Harris had to keep the band afloat while trying to hold on to a home of his own. In 1983, they were married. It was the period when Iron Maiden erupted. The number of the beast had lifted the band to the summit, and Harris, a lad from East London, had become one of heavy metal's anchor songwriters. Yet instead of living like a dissipated star, he tried to balance two worlds: months of touring across Europe and America, and the rare days at home in their London flat, where Lorraine and the children waited. Their marriage was more than a pairing. It was a long project of building a family. Harris and Lorraine had 4 children together: Lauren, Carrie, Faye, and George. All 4 were tied to the arts in one way or another. Lauren became a singer and actress, opening for Iron Maiden on the 2006 and 2008 tours. George pursued music with his band The Raven Age. Carrie worked as a production assistant for Maiden, and Faye later became a fashion writer for HuffPost. In the 1980s, friends in the business often recalled how, after blistering shows, Harris would immediately phone home to hear his children's voices, proof of his devotion to family. But the glare of fame always exacts a harsh price. An endless tour schedule, the pressure to write, and internal frictions within Maiden slowly became an invisible wall between Harris and Lorraine. She had to shoulder the family alone while her husband was away for months at a time. The tension built up, and by the early 1990s, the distance had become a fracture. Harris would later admit this period was the worst trial of my life, trying to keep a band in crisis together while watching his marriage fall apart. In 1993, Lorraine and Harris officially divorced after 10 years together. Painfully, that was also the year Bruce Dickinson left Iron Maiden. Losing both his life partner and the band's lead voice at once, Harris plunged into a darkness he had never known. He confessed that at one point he just wanted to punch Bruce, and he suspected Dickinson hadn't given his all in the final shows, especially Raising Hell. For Harris, the betrayal wasn't merely professional, it cut deeply into the brotherhood he had worked to build from day one. After the storm of the 1993 divorce from Lorraine Jury, Steve Harris fell into a vast emptiness. He remained steadfast with Iron Maiden, but in his private life, loneliness was plain to see. It was then that he met Emma, a woman much younger than he was. There are few records describing their first encounter, but the relationship arrived as an escape from old ruins. Emma brought a freshness that contrasted with the heavy atmosphere surrounding Harris and gradually became the emotional support that helped him rediscover a sense of family. They began living together in the mid-1990s, while Harris was still consumed by writing and never-ending tours. His love with Emma wasn't flashy, but solid enough for him to commit. They had 2 children together, Stanley and Maisie. Unlike Harris's first children, who grew up amid the frenzy of the 1980s when Iron Maiden stood atop the world, Stanley and Maisie were born into a different era, when Harris was more seasoned, more reflective, and determined to keep this new home from repeating past mistakes. This smaller family chose a discreet life, away from the media. In rare comments, Harris revealed himself as a devoted father, taking the kids to school, encouraging them to explore music without pressure. He once said he wanted Stanley and Maisie to grow up as normal kids, not living under the crushing shadow of Iron Maiden. Still, even with new love and 2 young children, the past's shadows were not easily dispelled. Work continued to carry Harris around the world, an absence Emma had to accept. Tabloids floated rumors of rifts and quiet conflicts between them, mostly centered on Harris, spending too much time on Maiden and British Lion, while family stood behind. Though never confirmed, one truth was clear. Harris often felt torn between two roles, the architect of a heavy metal empire and a family man. What made this relationship notable was that Harris didn't choose to run, as many artists might. However weary he was, he tried to hold on to Emma and their two children, because after the searing collapse with Lorraine, he understood all too well the value of a home. In the years that followed, while Iron Maiden entered a renaissance with Brave New World, The Book of Souls, and Senjutsu, Harris quietly built a more private life alongside the stage lights, where Emma and the little ones became the motivation for him to keep moving forward. Having weathered the ups and downs of marriage with Lorraine and then found calm with Emma, Steve Harris gradually poured more love and hope into his children. For him, family was not only a haven after each tour, but also a mirror reflecting part of his personal legacy. His eldest daughter, Lauren Harris, tried her hand at music early. Under the shadow of a towering father, the path was anything but easy. Yet she stood her ground on stage, opening for Iron Maiden on the 2006-2008 tours and releasing her solo album, Calm Before the Storm, 2008. She later continued on with the group Kingdom of I, proving she was not merely Steve Harris's daughter, but an artist with an independent drive. George Harris, the eldest son, inherited a love for the guitar. He founded the Raven Age, a young melodic metal band with real potential. More than once, the Raven Age opened for Iron Maiden on major tours. The Book of Souls, 2016, Legacy of the Beast, 2019, The Future Past, 2023. For George, it is both a source of pride and a trial, having to prove himself before tens of thousands accustomed to the standard his father set. Unlike Lauren and George, Carrie Harris chose the background, becoming a production assistant for Iron Maiden. Few know Carrie's name, but her quiet work keeps the huge machine running smoothly. Meanwhile, Faye Harris took a completely different path. She became a fashion journalist, contributing to HuffPost. In 2024, Faye entered a headline-making marriage with Tyrone Wood, son of Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones. The small yet meaningful wedding led the press to call it an alliance of two generations of rock legends. Though each child chose a different path, from music to backstage work to fashion, they all underscore one thing. Harris's legacy isn't confined to Iron Maiden, it radiates through his family. The fractures and losses he endured only made him cherish more deeply the sight of his children continuing the story in their own ways. After nearly half a century in music, Steve Harris has amassed a fortune estimated at around $60–70 million. Yet what draws attention is not the number itself, but the way Harris chooses to use it. He has never squandered money on luxury indulgences or the glitter of showbiz, but instead invested in spaces and possessions deeply tied to his passions, character, and need for peace. Real estate is the clearest testament. In the Bahamas, Harris owns a seaside villa, a tropical paradise of modern design, with glass walls opening onto the ocean, an infinity pool, and gardens lush with palms and tropical flowers. It's where he escapes the exhaustion of long tours, trading the roar of guitars for the rhythm of the waves. In England, he spent years in a Tudor-style mansion in Essex, a sprawling house with steep tiled roofs and manicured gardens, which he eventually sold in 2013 for nearly $6.8 million. He once described it as a private paradise, a sanctuary where he could find himself again after months on the road. He also owns a retreat in Suffolk, a blend of rustic and modern design surrounded by nature. With its wide wooden deck, hot tub, and outdoor kitchen, the home serves as a family hub, where warm summer evenings turn into cherished memories. Harris's passions extend beyond his homes. He is a dedicated car collector with a particular love for Porsche. His collection, valued in the millions, includes rare models coveted by enthusiasts. The elegant 1957 356A Carrera Speedster, the ultra-rare 1984 911 SCRS, only 20 ever made, the ferocious 1995 911 993 GT2, nicknamed the Widowmaker, the 1992 911 964 Carrera RS 3.8, a racing icon, and the limited edition 2011 997.2 GT3 RS 4.0 with only 600 produced. For Harris, these cars are more than vehicles. They embody precision, speed, and discipline, the very qualities that define his music. And yet, beneath it all, Steve Harris lives as a simple man. He still plays football with the amateur team the Maidonians, proudly bearing West Ham United's logo on his base. He plays tennis when he can, enjoys photography to capture everyday moments, and has a deep love for nature and animals. For him, these are ways to balance life, letting peace coexist with the storm called heavy metal. Friends and colleagues often describe Harris as reserved and introspective. He rarely seeks the spotlight for himself, though in truth, he is the pillar holding Iron Maiden steady. When the stage lights fade, Harris returns to family, to his personal hobbies, and to quiet days far from noise. It's as if he simply wants to live fully as Steve Harris the man, not Steve Harris of Iron Maiden, a separation both modest and weighty after decades of devotion. More than half a century has passed since that Christmas in 1975, when Harris pieced together Iron Maiden from fragments. Today, his legacy extends far beyond a band. It stands as a declaration for an entire generation of heavy metal, proof that from the working-class streets of East London, one man could build an empire that commanded the world's respect. Harris's music has always carried two layers. On the surface, aggression, speed, and that unmistakable galloping bass. Beneath, stories steeped in history, mythology, literature, and philosophy. Thanks to this, Iron Maiden transcended the boundaries of a rock band. They became a hidden curriculum for countless young listeners, introducing them to epic battles, literary figures, and human tragedies. At every level, Harris is the architect of that world, a storyteller through music, steadfast and relentless. His influence spread in ways few bassists ever achieve. In his hands, the bass was no longer a background instrument, but the band's heartbeat. Thousands of young musicians from the 1980s onward have adopted his galloping style, the rhythmic signature that makes Iron Maiden instantly recognizable. International music magazines readily call him the most influential bassist in metal, placing his name alongside Geezer Butler, Black Sabbath, Lemmy Kilmister, Motorhead, and Ian Hill, Judas Priest. But Harris's legacy isn't confined to studios or stages. He has left a mark through acts of humanity as well. When Clive Burr, Iron Maiden's first drummer, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, Harris and his bandmates founded the Clive Burr MS Trust Fund in 2002, staging benefit concerts to cover his treatment. In 2024, Harris took part in a charity football match in Portugal, raising funds for underprivileged children. That same year, his side project British Lion staged a benefit gig to save the Booking Hall in Dover, a small live venue facing closure. Harris played for free, donating all proceeds to keep the space alive for young bands. Even past 60, he chose to stand with the community, not just as a legend, but as a companion. By 2025, Iron Maiden has sold more than 130 million albums and played over 2,500 concerts worldwide. The first generation of fans now bring their children and grandchildren to the shows, and Harris's music echoes across generations like an unquenchable flame. Few bands in heavy metal history have matched such longevity and loyalty. Steve Harris's legacy isn't about trophies on a shelf. It is a global community bound together by his music. From London to Rio de Janeiro, Tokyo to Los Angeles, wherever Run to the Hills or The Trooper rings out, tens of thousands of arms rise in unison, voices shouting as one. That is the most powerful proof of the impact of a quiet man at the edge of the stage. At an age when many of his peers have stepped away, Steve Harris still chooses endurance, still holds the rhythm of a legend. Not through flashy statements, but with relentless consistency, sometimes making him seem rigid to others. Yet it is this very rigidity that kept Iron Maiden from ever collapsing, even when all seemed lost. The lingering question remains: to preserve an empire, must an artist sacrifice the softness of his private life? And are those quiet moments outside the spotlight Harris's way of reclaiming balance after decades of living only for music? And you, when you think of Steve Harris, do you see a strict leader or a man silently sacrificing so the dream of metal could survive for half a century? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe this journey deserves to be told forever, leave a comment. Yes, Iron Maiden, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay with us on more stories of the lives and legacies of music legends.